Well, welcome everyone. This is Toni Weel, and we have an exciting topic today. Very exciting, very important one too. And we have with us Sara, as usual, Katie, Gary, and our guest Daniel Roytas. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Daniel has been with us a few times before, talking about bacteria, about viruses, the topic of today. He wrote a book that I would say you have to give that to everyone you know, especially the ones who have not woken up yet. And it's called Can You Catch a Cold? The link to the book and to his website are in the description. So it's easy to find. And it's about Untold History and Human Experiments. I haven't read all the human experiments yet, but I did come across a few topics and that was actually the title of today's podcast too, about where is the virus and what even is a virus. So we let Daniel go in that soon. What I found interesting that in his book was viruses do not cause disease, viruses are not contagious, viruses may not even exist. And then I started looking on the internet and see, okay, what exactly is a virus? How many are there? And of course, now it doesn't want to open up to me. Okay, here we go. 380 trillion viruses. Not 380 viruses, no, 380 trillion. And as of now, there are 219 known species of viruses that can affect humans. However, it has been estimated that there are over 380 trillion viruses inhabiting us, a community collectively known as the human virome. Approximately 200 different viruses are known to cause disease in humans, including HIV, poliovirus, influenza virus A, B, C, or D, and SARS-CoV-2 or COVID. And then it's being said, and this is in a scientific magazine, the human virome, the trillions of viruses inside your body that is keeping you alive. And we try hard to avoid viral infection, but what if some viruses are essential to the functioning of our bodies? And it goes on it's on the skin, the gut microbiome, and they all put that under a virus. And they say it's the sum of all viruses within our body, found in every tissue from our blood to our brains, and even interwoven in the genetic code within our cells. Now, I'm sure that Daniel has a lot to say about that, but I want to go on with a part of this article too. Viruses are the most numerous organisms on Earth. While we are thought to have roughly the same number of bacterial cells as human cells in our body, around 37 trillion, I wonder who counted them, we probably have at least 10 times as many virus particles again. Many of these viruses are involved in essential bodily processes, forming part of our inner ecosystem. It's probably safe to say we couldn't survive long if they all disappeared. Yet, we have a long way to go before we get close to understanding what most of these viruses do exactly, or, in fact, what even most of them are. It has been estimated that the field of virology so far has only explored around 1% of viral diversity in existence. Most viruses remain undiscovered, referred to by some scientists as a viral dark matter. Despite this, they occur through all parts of our body. Now, the thing that I found interesting is when I started researching this more, about how many viruses there are, and they are all named. Can you believe that? Page after page, thousands and thousands and thousands, and they are all named. I don't know if all 380 trillion are named. I doubt that, but that would be something. That's a lifetime's work.
You need a bigger book.
Yeah, no, not in the book. But anyway, though, yeah, viruses. We had the greening disease here in Florida. So the half of the citrus died, and that was a virus that came over from Mexico. And yeah, something happened to the trees and the fruits, lemons, oranges is what you have a lot here, and they just stayed hard and they were not edible anymore. So something did happen to them, but I don't think that we really know what it is. Now, another thing is that it is, they say here that more than two-thirds of human viruses can also infect non-human hosts, mainly mammals and sometimes birds. Many specialist human viruses also have mammalian or avian origins. Indeed, a substantial proportion of mammalian viruses may be capable of crossing the species barriers into humans, although only half of these are capable of being transmitted by humans, and around half of again are of transmitting well enough to cause major outbreaks. Well, they still like now the bird flu is pretty active, and there was an I just read a flashback that goes back to May 23. General Kirillov claimed Russian military obtained samples of deadly avian influenza, also known as bird flu, from a conquered U.S. DoD lab in the Kherson region that could jump species, which has a 40% kill rate in humans. So here we go again. So now I'll let you get into all of this, Daniel.
There's a lot of information there, Tony, that you've read off. And I think the first question we have to ask ourselves before we start trying to unpack a lot of those claims and a lot of that information is maybe just think about this logically. If someone said to you, people talk about unicorns, everyone knows what unicorns are. There's a mythical creature in Australia, actually. It's called a bunyip. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of a bunyip before, but they're supposedly these four-legged creatures that inhabit the waterways and the swamps in Australia. And I don't know if they exist or not. They're like a Aboriginal folklore. But if someone said to me, there's 380 million bunyips in Australia, and there's all these different kinds and these different varieties of bunyips, and they all do different things. And there's a bunyipologist out there making claims about these creatures and what they do. What would be the first thing that you'd ask them?
Have you seen
I'd be
them?
like, what was that?
Have you seen them?
How do you know
Where'd
how
you see
many
it?
there are?
How do you know how many there are?
Yeah.
How do you know what they do? How have you classified them? How have you identified them? How have you characterized them? Show me a bunyip first, and then we can start opening up the conversation about how many of these things actually exist. But until such time as you can show me one, then like the discussion ends there, as far as I'm concerned. Now we can say the same with viruses. So there's a claim that there's 380 trillion in the human body. But if you look through the mainstream literature, they admit that they have never, no virologist, no microbiologist, no one has ever observed a virus in nature. Never. Not once. So the bunyipologist has never seen your bunyip. A virologist has never seen a virus, what they call a virus, in nature. That's a problem, right? Because if they don't see it in nature, then how on earth do you know that it's actually a real entity and that it does all these things that it are claimed, or that a virus is claimed to do? So that's the first hurdle that we have to get across here, is someone show the virus. Now that should be a relatively easy thing to do, because if there are more virus particles making up the human body than there are bacterial cells and human cells, then wouldn't it make sense that you just take a sample of some tissue, or you take a sample of some biological fluid, and you look at that fluid under a microscope and you see the virus? Then, like, okay, we see the virus in the sample, but how do you know that that the thing you're pointing at in the sample is the virus? So what you have to do then is get just the virus, and then someone makes a claim, this virus causes disease, or this virus causes health, or this virus does yada, yada, yada. And you get that virus and you expose it to a person and you see what happens. But that's never been done either. So here you face some issues where no one's seen one in nature. No one's had a pure sample of one to be able to identify it, characterize it, and then they haven't exposed it to anybody, not a human being, not an animal, not an insect, not a plant, to see what it does. So what a virologist will say, and this is sort of what you'll read in the mainstream articles, is that you can't do that. You can't take a sample from someone and observe a virus because there's not enough to see. They openly admit this. The only way you can see a virus is if you grow it in a lab, and there's a very specific set of procedures, laboratory procedures, and very specific types of let's call them ingredients, that have to be used, and a very specific recipe that must be followed for a virologist to see the virus. So they say what they're doing is that they're growing a virus in cell culture, and by doing that process, they grow enough to see. That in and of itself is a problem, because you would have to say to that virologist, demonstrate to me that what you're seeing in your laboratory, in a petri dish or in a culture flask, is what is it's the same thing in the human body. What you're seeing in the lab is also present in the human body. They can't do that because they haven't got a reference standard. That reference standard must come from nature. You have to see it in nature first. This may get a little bit difficult for people to understand, so I'll use an analogy here. Let's imagine you had a baker, and the baker said, chocolate cakes in nature, naturally existing chocolate cakes, when people eat them, causes disease, causes diabetes, causes heart attack, stroke, obesity, whatever. My first response to that baker would be, chocolate cakes in nature do this, huh? Well, show me a chocolate cake in nature. Oh, well, but I can't show you a chocolate cake in nature because there's not enough to see, but I can prove that they're real things if you come into the kitchen with me. And I'll take some flour, and I'll take some eggs and some milk, and I'll beat it all together, and I'll add in some sugar and some chocolate powder and put it in a big mixing bowl, and then I'll put it into my oven and bake at 180 degrees for 2 hours. And then I'll take it out and I'll lather some chocolate icing on the top, and then I'll decorate it nicely with some berries and some cream. There's a chocolate cake. It's a real thing. It exists. When you eat it, now it's going to make you sick. You would think that that baker is nuts, because he clearly just made the thing that he said exists in nature. There are no chocolate cakes in nature. They don't exist. The guy baked one, but now he's using that thing that he baked in his kitchen as proof of something existing in nature, which he never demonstrated existed there in the first place. So that is akin to what the field of virology does. They say we must do these things in the lab, in the kitchen first, and only when we follow a very specific recipe do we get the virus, or the thing we claim is the virus. And then when we've got it, we can take a picture of it with an electron microscope, point to an indiscriminate particle and say, you see that thing there? That's the virus. So like, this is how nuts it is. This is the sort of extent of the problem that we're dealing with here. Now, I'm not saying that viruses don't exist. I'm not saying that viruses aren't real things. I'm like not trying to disprove the existence of a virus. The fact of the matter is, I have not seen a single paper published anywhere in the scientific literature that demonstrates the existence of a virus. So if you can't demonstrate the existence of it in nature, then you can't do work where people say, oh, you're trying to disprove the existence of viruses. No, I'm not. It's never been proven in the first place, so there's nothing for me to disprove. I'm just looking at the evidence, looking at the evidence that proves that these things exist in the first place. Baker's never shown me the chocolate cake in nature. The virologist has never shown me the virus in nature. So this is sort of like an introduction, an easy way to sort of understand the problem that we're facing here. Sorry, I'll hand it back to you now.
Nice. Well, with what you just told, it's like, okay, end of story. We don't know about viruses. They could exist, but it's not been proven. And yet, I think more than 99% of the population is sure there are viruses, and they would come back with the HIV and the influenza and everything else under the sun. And we have the idea about, okay, a virus is nothing more than a dead protein in the body. But it's still confusing for people. I mean, you wrote a whole book about it, and I'm not afraid of a virus. I'm not afraid of catching anything. I've never been afraid of bacteria. It's the thing of washing your hands 20 times a day. It's like, that's not me. So, and it never made me sick. I've never did I have the flu? Yeah, I had some detox symptoms. I now know what it is. But people are worried. And it keeps coming up now with all the vaccinations against all these viruses that don't really exist or cannot be proven, let's say it that way. Then all the vaccines are shouldn't be even there. So what is because when I heard saying that, oh yeah, we absolutely want to keep the polio vaccine active, and it's all over the world, and people get polio, And we know when we look back on when the polio stuff started in the Netherlands, it was a lot of the was it DDT, I think, was being sprayed in that time. So they figured out there was a connection there. Gary, what is your take on this? With what
Well, I did
Daniel
have a
said?
question. Yeah, I have a question for Daniel. So if they're creating the virus in a lab, is it synthetic? I mean, I know the chocolate cake is not synthetic, or I guess it could be classified as that because it's made up by humans. But when you create a virus in a petri dish or wherever they're creating it, would that be considered synthetic, and that's why they can patent it? Or do they patent viruses?
They are patented. Yes.
So that was my
So
question.
they say. So they say. Now, there's an important distinction here that must be made. So I mentioned in that sort of long rant I was going on there that essentially what they do is they take like cells from an animal and they starve it and poison it in a petri dish. And then the tissue, the cells start to break down and they point at indiscriminate particles that they observe under an electron microscope and say, that thing there is the virus. They've never taken that particle, they've never isolated it from that cell culture where they've been growing it, and then exposed it to any living organism and shown that that thing causes disease. It's never been done. So the claim is that those particles are subcellular or submicroscopic, intracellular, obligate parasites. And essentially what they do is that they have a piece of genetic material inside them that when it enters your body, goes into your own cells, hijacks the cell's machinery, and it starts to make hundreds and millions of copies of itself until the cell gets overwhelmed and bursts open and the cell dies. And then the virus goes to the next cell and that process replicates until it destroys massive amounts of tissue in your body. But they have never demonstrated that these things do what they claim. So they also say that the breakdown effects that they see in these cell culture experiments, the particles, the cell debris, that those particles are indistinguishable in their shape, size, and morphology from a virus particle, and that there's no way for them to separate a virus particle from these just bits of cell debris and fragments in the cell culture. So they openly admit they can't basically take that particle, that disease-causing particle, out of the cell culture and then expose it to someone, which you must do in order to prove a cause and effect relationship, to prove that that thing causes disease. But they admit that they can't separate it out. And the reason why I think they say they can't separate it out is because there's nothing to separate. All they're working with is a bunch of dead animal cells. There's nothing there. It's just a story that they tell us, and they show us a fancy picture in a medical textbook and see that particle there is the problem. So then show me that it's the problem. Where's the scientific experiment that's demonstrated that this thing is the cause of the issue? That's never been done. So I don't think that they can create a synthetic virus. I don't think that there is anything that spreads the way that they tell us disease like spreads between people. I don't think there are any contagious pathogens. I think there are other explanations as to why we see groups of people falling sick at the same time, one after another. But it sure as heck isn't from a virus occurring in nature that I have been able to identify So there might be some evidence out there that I've missed, but a lot of us have been looking for a long time. We can't find it. So there's no virus in nature that we're aware of that does what they claim. And there's also no evidence of them being able to make a synthetic one. So this idea of like a lab leak or a lab created virus, I think, is just fear mongering to keep people focused on a red herring, and it draws their attention away and keeps them focused on things that aren't the problem, right? Focus on the virus. As long as you're looking at a virus, as long as you're looking at a germ, then you're not investigating the things that really are making you sick. And that's quite a handy thing to do, because once you stop looking at viruses and germs as the problem, and again, I'm not saying that viruses and germs don't cause disease, maybe they do. But once you stop looking at them as the problem, then you start thinking, right, well, what else could potentially be making people sick? And when you do that, there are some real standout things that you would go, oh, maybe those things are the problem. And if it turns out that those things are the problem, well, that affects the very fabric of society then, because we have to start looking at basically the way that we're living life, living in this sick, toxic Western society. And I don't think the world's ready for that yet. So, long-winded answer to your question, but I hope it sort of gives you the answer or the information you're looking for.
Yeah. Yes, because basically it's all made up. It appears to be all made up. So moving on here, what are some of the other things that may be causing the cold and flu-like symptoms that we're having, or the issues that we're having in our body? What are some of the things that you were kind of leading towards that might cause these issues, these, I don't want to use the word, this pandemic that we face, and evidently there's another one coming up. What do you feel could be the cause of the issues we're having, like the Spanish flu or those kind of things?
Yeah, so you mentioned like a few different things there, and maybe I'll just touch on the Spanish flu to
Okay.
start with, because that's like
Yep.
a big one in people's minds. Like, if there's no virus, then what happened with the Spanish flu?
Right.
Killed, according to different sources, between 50 and 100 million people. It was the most lethal pandemic the world has ever seen. Over 500 million people got affected by this thing. And as I was saying before, like about using germs as scapegoats to keep your eye off the real potential underlying cause, again, I make no claims. I'm not saying equivocally that germs are not the problem. Maybe they are. But when you look at the Spanish flu, and I looked at it in detail, in great detail in my book, and no one's ever done this before, as far as I'm aware. The symptoms of the Spanish flu, people would just assume it was a really bad, really bad flu. And you just got some fluid in your lungs, and you basically, if you were unlucky enough, you got pneumonia and you died. But the symptoms of the Spanish flu were very peculiar and very particular. So we're talking like you would wake up in the morning perfectly healthy, and you would get dressed and start walking to work. And on your way to work, you would acquire the virus, it would infect you, and then within a matter of minutes, you're dropped dead in the street. Your eyes, ears, mouth, nose start to bleed. Your skin turns a black-blue color. You're asphyxiating to death. You're coughing up thick yellow mucus. There's frothy, watery fluid bubbling out of your mouth. your hair starts to fall out. Your body smells like musty hay or straw. What sort of flu behaves like this? What sort of virus does that to a human being? People
Maybe
who
I was going to say
sorry,
maybe a poisonous virus. So, because that doesn't sound like a virus to me. That sounds more like poison.
well, yeah, that's the original Latin for the word virus is a poison.
Oh, learn
Now,
something new each time.
coincidentally, sorry, Sarah, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all. I was say I didn't know that meant poison either. But to me, that sounds like poisoning.
Right. So coincidentally, around the exact time that we had this outbreak of the Spanish flu, hundreds of millions of tons of chemical warfare agents were being deployed on human beings across the planet. And one of those chemical warfare agents used in World War One was called phosgene gas. Phosgene gas was a colorless, odorless chemical warfare agent. The symptoms of phosgene gas poisoning was everything that I just mentioned for someone dying of the Spanish flu. Like, what sort of flu makes you smell like musty hay or straw? Just so turns out that phosgene gas poisoning makes your body smell like musty hay or straw, and your hair falls out, and you asphyxiate to death, and your skin turns black and blue, and you die of right-sided heart failure, and like basically all the symptoms exactly the same. What a coincidence! What a coincidence! Just so turns out that the Spanish flu, unlike any other flu, didn't affect young children and the elderly. It affected men of fighting age. Oh, what another coincidence. Just so turns out that people working in phosgene gas manufacturing plants in cities across the world, well, phosgene lowered their immunity and it made them really susceptible to catching the Spanish flu. So a lot of the workers in these phosgene gas plants, really high mortality rates of the Spanish flu. Doctors performing autopsies and pathologists performing autopsies could not tell the difference. Medical reports here, published in the literature, they could not tell the difference between someone who died of phosgene gas poisoning or someone who died of the Spanish flu. Like, they were looking at their lung tissue or their respiratory tract. They could not tell the difference. So maybe that's just a big coincidence that this outbreak of a really deadly virus happened at the same time that we were basically poisoning millions of people on battlefields in Europe, right? But how did people in cities not involved in the war, like on the other side of the realm that we live on, fall ill with these same symptoms? Well, again, if you look at some of these mainstream media reports, military documents, they show that there were spies infiltrating cities around the world, releasing canisters of flu germs in cinemas, in shopping centers, on the streets. There were camouflage ships sneaking into docks around the world under the cover of darkness and releasing eyewitnesses reported greasy looking clouds into the air, which would then waft across the city. Reports of submarines sneaking off the coastline and then deploying canisters of flu germs into the ocean, which would drift ashore. People would be walking along the beach, pick up these canisters, take them home, and then they'd get flu germs sprayed in their face. And they'd get the Spanish flu and die. So they openly admit that happened. So were they really releasing flu germs on people? Or were they releasing something else on people? Were we witnessing the effects of chemical warfare here? I don't know. I have no idea. I'm not saying either way. I just think it's really peculiar that that would happen. So that might help put it into context as to why this idea of a virus is so important. Because if there were no viruses and people had not even that concept in their mind, well, maybe they would have put two and two together and gone, holy shit, we're being poisoned here. It's not spreading. It's not this contagious thing going around. We're under attack. So is a similar kind of thing happening in modern times? Are people ill because of viruses and germs, or are we ill because we're spraying, I think it was like several 100 billion tons of poison on our food last year? Are people sick because of the air pollution, or the stuff that's going into the water supply, or the toxic chemicals in our homes, or the microplastics in our environment, or the synthetic clothing that we're wearing, or the artificial lighting that we're exposed to, or the list goes on. So is it the germ and the virus, the bacteria, the virus, the parasite, the mold, the whatever, or is it the poison? I don't know. I'll leave it up to you guys to make up your mind, but maybe that will sort of open up a few more channels of discourse here.
Yeah, and then we have social contagion. I was reading that, and I think the one of the cola crisis in I think that was in Belgium was quite interesting. And I can read some, but would you like to talk about social contagion, which can explain a lot of what is going on too?
Yeah, more than happy to talk about social contagion. And maybe just quickly before I get there, I think there may be something else that's a really important factor that's affecting people's health that may appear like something's spreading, but it's not. So very quickly, air quality is important. So human beings need quite clean air. If you don't have clean air, you're not going to be living very long. In places like China, the air quality is not great at the best of times. The World Health Organization, think about them what you want. They have a current recommendation for the maximum allowable limit of PM 2.5, particulate matter that is less than 2.5 microns in size. So it's tiny little microscopic particles which come from basically manufacturing plants and whole plants and all these kinds of things. We're pumping pollution into the atmosphere. Exhaust fumes, brake dust, all this kind of stuff. The maximum allowable limit of PM 2.5 is 5 micrograms per cubic meter. Not very much at all. 5. On a good day in China, it's probably like 50. 2019, when this pandemic broke out, there was a temperature inversion that happened across China. So an environmental weather event, which basically caused the particulate matter in the air to go up to 700 micrograms per cubic meter. That's like smoking 50 cigarettes in a day.
Wow.
Now, what usually happens is that when you get pollution during the day, it accumulates close to the earth. At night, when the air starts to cool, as the atmosphere starts to cool, that hot air layer closest to the earth starts to rise up, and it takes that pollution away with it. So you have a nice, like, fresh, clean air to breathe the next day. But when you get a temperature inversion, a change in temperature and humidity, it causes like a lid to form over that layer of warm air closest to the ground where all the pollution is. And that happened in these areas. They say people started getting these new respiratory symptoms across China. So people were literally breathing air, which is equivalent to smoking 50 cigarettes a day. And they complain of respiratory symptoms, and we go, oh, it's a virus. Now, interestingly, your body has a natural mechanism for clearing out crud, for clearing out stuff that you breathe in, and these little finger-like projections in your respiratory tract called cilia. See this thing called mucociliary clearance. That process is inhibited when the humidity changes and it dries out your respiratory tract. Now, when that happens, your body basically sloughs off the lining of your lungs and you start coughing up all that stuff. It triggers a cough response, a sneezing response. It releases a bunch of inflammatory markers which cause the same symptoms as a cold or flu. So what we're witnessing there is a change in temperature or humidity triggering people to start having this physiological response because they're breathing in toxic polluted air. And this would be like a widespread effect. So you might see tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people all being affected by this change in the weather conditions. It looks like something's spreading between them, but it's not. So this is very well documented in the literature that this effect happens. But what they say is that the virus piggybacks on the PM 2.5 particles, and the pollution in the air lowers your immunity so that you're more susceptible to the virus that's piggybacking on the pollution particles. Right? And we buy it. So now it's like, oh, well, yeah, gee, it's not really the pollution, it's still the virus. But if you take the virus out of the equation, what are you left with? You're left with a shitload of air pollution. So you want to get on top of that, right? But people aren't worrying about it so much because it's not like the most imminent threat. The most imminent threat is this viral particle, and I've got to do things to protect myself, like increasing my immunity. So that might explain, just like one explanation about how things might appear to spread. And I'm sorry to go on, Toni. I know you asked about social contagion. Do you want me to tackle that now, or is that point enough to
do
maybe
whatever
give you
comes
guys
up.
something to talk about?
Yeah, you do whatever comes up in your mind, please.
Daniel, I do have a question about what you're talking about right now. Is that how they can predict when there's going to be like a really bad flu season or something like that? Because they're actually using the weather or the chemicals that are in the air, the pollution, to predict how sick people are going to be for that coming year or whatnot?
Spot on. Yeah. So again, this is like very common knowledge that government agencies and meteorologists are able to predict with like pinpoint accuracy when an outbreak is going to occur, when a certain threshold in humidity and temperature is breached. And that so-called epidemic will occur within about 6 weeks of that environmental temperature humidity change occurring. So they see that humidity change and they go, right, in 6 weeks there's going to be an epidemic in this area. Yeah.
Amazing,
so that's how they do it.
Yeah, and that sounds like COPD, because my stepdad, he had passed away from COPD, and those were like the symptoms that he was having when he lost all those, are they cilia? What'd you call them? The little hairs inside the lung, the cilia?
Mucociliary clearance, the cilia.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep. So he lost all those, and they did talk about the humidity and stuff like that too. And but he was already so far progressed. But everything you were talking about sounds exactly like COPD symptoms that he was having, and then also like the respiratory stuff like that too. So that has to do with the humidity and of the
because
environment,
it
or
dries out your mucous membranes
okay.
in your lungs. So
Mm,
usually, if you're breathing in pollution, your body does an excellent job at clearing all of that inhaled particulate matter out of your lungs. Does a really, really good job. Like those little finger-like projections in your lungs, they're beating something like, I can't remember exactly. I thought it was like 1,000 times a minute. I'll stand corrected on that. Maybe it's 1,000 times a day, but it's quite often, and they're just working like brooms. They're like the street sweepers of your lungs. So whilst they're working, they'll just keep bringing that particulate matter up out of your respiratory tract into the back of your throat, and then you swallow it. But when the humidity changes and the air becomes drier and your mucous membranes start to dry out, that process is inhibited. So you're not clearing it out normally. You're not clearing the pollution out normally. So the body's then got to start doing other things to clear that stuff out. So what does it do? It starts overproducing mucus because it's being dried out by the air. It starts sloughing off the lining because all those little finger-like projections, the cells, when they dry out, they essentially die. But it's like, well, we've got to get rid of them. We've got to replace them with new ones. So you get all the cell debris in your lungs. And your body induces a cough response and a sneeze response and maybe sometimes a fever as a means of clearing all of that out. And we've confused that with the humidity's dried out your lungs. You're more susceptible to inhaling viruses in the air, which then infect your tissue and then start to produce a cough response and a sneeze response as a mechanism, because these viruses, which are dead, they're really smart, as a mechanism of coughing out and transferring to another human being so that they can reproduce in somebody else. So they tell us that the cough response is actually the virus is doing because it wants to make other little baby viruses, not that your body is actually responding to changes in its environment. So they're sort of like the two ways that you can look at this. And I sort of know where my mind rests with all of these things. Um, so I might just talk briefly about social contagion, because a very large part of this book, actually, Can You Catch a Cold, is on the power of the mind. Social contagion is well studied in the field of psychology, and I actually had a PhD psychologist help me write this section of the book. Social contagion is the study of emotions, thoughts, feelings, behaviors between people living in groups. We're talking about things like laughing or crying or scratching or itching or feelings or emotions like anger, happiness, frustration, love, right? This is the study of social contagion. We don't know how exactly these things spread from one another, but they seem to be on cues, like visual or auditory cues. And they say that this conveys some kind of survival or adaptive benefit for people living in groups to respond to things going on in the world around them. Think of like a bunch of gazelles in the long grass, and one of them sees a lion, and they all look up and look, and not like there wasn't any like verbal communication there. There was something that was triggered amongst all of those gazelles to be instantly alerted to the lion when one of them detects it. This is like a survival mechanism because there's no time to go, hey, mate, there's a lion over there. You better get out. Hey, you. But before you tell everyone, the pack's dead. right? So it's like an instant thing that happens. This is like another example of social contagion. So it conveys some sort of survival or uh, adaptive response in humans. Like for yawning, for example, they say when you see someone else yawn, it might indicate a change in pressure in the local area or a change in temperature now, and the sort of area in your nasopharynx, which is closest to the brain, starts to change. So now you're yawning to change the amount of air that's flowing in, which will then regulate the temperature closer to that part of the brain that is exposed to that external environment. Like there's all these sort of hypotheses about the reasons why we might have these adaptive responses. So that's like social contagion. How are these things actually really happening? Don't really know. But what we do know is that there's no virus involved. So there are inbuilt innate mechanisms inside all of us that when we see one person do something or respond a certain way to a change in its environment, we will inherently and automatically mimic what that person's doing. Sometimes just involuntarily, sometimes voluntarily. So you see someone itching, well, now I start itching. You see someone yawn, well, now I yawn. You see someone crying, well, now I start to feel a bit teary. You see someone happy, well, now I'm starting to feel happy. So this is social contagion. And there's also this thing called mass psychogenic illness, where we see the spread of disease amongst people, groups of people. Again, no virus required. So there's a very famous example of this, the Tanganyika, which is now known as Tanzania in Africa, a laughing epidemic, where there was a school, all-girls school, a couple of hundred girls at the school. One girl starts laughing uncontrollably and feels like there's someone chasing her. And it's very debilitating. She's totally incapacitated. And the next day, second girl, then a third, and then a fourth, and a fifth, and a sixth, and pretty soon they had to shut the whole school down. They sent all those girls back home to their respective villages. And lo and behold, all the people in their respective villages, some of which were separated by hundreds of kilometers, they start getting the same symptoms. Now, that lasted for like a couple of years from memory, and it affected thousands of people across Africa. No virus required. I'm not aware of any virus that goes around infecting people, making them laugh and feel like they're being chased. What's going on there? So they investigate these so-called mass psychogenic illness events. They try to find the cause, and they can't find what actually was responsible for it. So they chalk it up as a mass psychogenic illness. No germ, no bacteria, no parasite, no virus. There are ones where it's like flu-like symptoms happen. There was one it was like Kosovo or Bosnia or something, where there was a school of children and they all started getting this influenza-like illness after smelling something weird in the air. And then other students caught wind of like, oh my God, there's a really bad flu going around, and they started getting sick and affected quite a few hundred students. Many were rushed to hospital. They send in a team to investigate. They can't find anything. No virus, no pathogen, nothing. They say to the students, hey, look, we don't think there's anything going on. We think you're going to be okay. Students get better. Next day, all's good. No virus, but a mass spreading epidemic of illness. So the sort of last point I'll say on this is that from a very young age, we are told that when you see someone cough or sneeze near you, you'll catch their germs and you'll get sick. Now, you might come in contact with 100 people and that you never get sick, but then one day you do. Oh, shit, mum and dad were right. I got sick. Someone made me ill. Was that just like a self-fulfilling prophecy that you became ill? You were told by someone that it was so, so you did. And then you go forward for the rest of your life believing that contagion is real. There are placebo-controlled experiments where they've said to people, we're exposing you to flu germs now, Mr. Smith, and we want you to go into that room and spend the night, and we're going to see what happens to you. Oh, I've been exposed to flu germs. Within a matter of hours, he's coughing and sneezing, and he's shivering in his bed, and he's up all night moaning. It's obviously the man flu, right? Wakes up in the morning, and a nurse comes in and says, Mr. Smith, April Fool's Day, we got ya. We didn't give you flu germs, we gave you salt water. Within 15 minutes, the guy's better. So he got a full-blown cold or flu because he expected that he would. He thought he got exposed to a flu germ. So what happens if every single media outlet in the world, every single peak medical body and government says there's a disease coming? These are the symptoms you're going to get. This is when it's affecting your area. This is how you're going to feel. This is what you need to do. It's really bad. You need to be scared. You need to shelter in place. You need to wear a mask. You need to do all these things and stay inside. Did people manifest the symptoms and the illness because they were told to? Did we just witness like mass psychogenic illness? Possibly. So there are examples of this in the literature. New Zealand, 2017, an antidepressant drug comes off patent. They're replacing it with a generic drug, and they start advertising on TV. If you're taking this antidepressant, we're going to be giving you a new drug soon, and here is a list of 6 side effects that you'll experience if you're getting the generic drug. Lo and behold, they start rolling this drug out, and people start reporting in huge numbers, I'm experiencing these 6 side effects. I'm taking the new drug. And this made like news headlines. It started getting spoken about in the scientific literature. The people complaining of the symptoms were only complaining of the symptoms that they were told, or the side effects they were told to experience by the media. The package insert inside the box had a list of side effects like 30 things long, but no one experienced the other 24 things that they weren't told to experience. So if you're told to experience flu-like symptoms and a loss of taste or smell by people who you trust, by people in positions of authority, and it's on repeat day after day after day after day, and it's all you hear and it consumes your life, is it possible that you just manifest the symptoms that way? We know that people can do this with their mind alone. There are experiments where people have been given a drug which they think, like, we're giving you chemotherapy. You're in a cancer trial, you're getting exposed to chemotherapy, and we want to see what happens to you. Their hair starts falling out, they start getting nausea and muscle wastage and all the symptoms of like the side effects of chemotherapy. But they weren't given chemotherapy at all. They were given salt water. But their hair fell out. Like, the power of the mind is so incredible. We do not give it enough credit. So when you believe wholeheartedly that the guy in the white coat is right and he is the arbiter of truth and he would never do anything to hurt you and he knows all, and he's standing in front of the world going, this is what's going to happen to you, maybe you just manifested it with your mind, and that is all we saw over the last 4 years was just a pandemic of fear. Final point is, even if there was a germ and it was spreading and it was making people sick, is it the right way to go about doing things by creating fear in people? because we know it lowers your immunity. If that's even really a thing, I don't think there's anything to be immune against. So why would you come out and scare the shit out of 6 billion people? Wouldn't you say, look, guys, there's potentially something happening here. Here are all the steps that you need to take to stay healthy. We want everyone outside exercising. We want you in the sun. We want you being around people that you love and care about, because we know that social connection is one of the most key determining factors in good health. We want you eating well. We're going to send out like gift cards to the local organic food store, and so every family has access to fresh produce. We're going to close down every alcohol and tobacconist just for the next 6 months because there's a respiratory illness going around. We're going to shut down manufacturing plants in some key areas to reduce the amount of emissions going into the atmosphere, because we know that enhances your susceptibility to illness. Like, none of that happened. And all it was there's a virus, there's nothing you can do, shut your life down. And if you're lucky, you might get a jab in the arm that's going to save you. But apart from that, don't see anybody. Order Uber Eats every night, eat shit, get as much alcohol into you as you can, be scared, be depressed, don't exercise, do not go outside, don't get sun, don't get fresh air. Let's see how you go. Like, and then people get sick and we wonder why. So this is a big problem. This is a big issue. But I don't think understanding it is quite as complex as it really needs to be. It's actually very simple. We just need to look after ourselves and the world a little bit better. Sorry for going on for so long.
Not at all. That was fantastic.
Yeah, there is a question. How do thousands of lab hacks working in virology around the world get swindled by this concept? I have only one answer. Money, money, money.
Virologist actually helped me write the book. Well, I wrote the book. I wrote the book, but he was there acting as like a subject matter expert, and he edited a few key parts just to make sure that the information we were putting out was true and correct. Now, he wished to remain anonymous for obvious reasons, but he came to this conclusion in 2014. 2014, I'm pretty sure. So he's been aware of the problems with virology for a long time and actually made the decision to leave the profession. But he never questioned what he was doing. He went to university, he did a 4-year degree, he went and did his honors and these other postgraduate qualifications. And they said, you go into the lab, you put this reagent in here, you get this culture flask, you put that tissue sample in, you expose it to this temperature, and you do this and you do that. And then there's your virus. And we just need you to keep doing that 1,000 times because we need to make a batch of viruses, and off you go. Okay, no worries, boss. I'll go and make up those 1,000 batches of, or 100 batches or dozen batches or whatever virus you need. Oh, good. You've done all that. Okay, great. Well, now we need to isolate the virus now. Can you do it using this methodology? Yep, I'll go and isolate the virus because this is how I was told to do it. I think I'm isolating a virus, but I've never thought about it. And let's do it. And he said to me, like, he never thought about what he was doing, never questioned the methods. He just believed that what he was told was the way that it all worked. And it wasn't until he actually started thinking and going, hang on a minute, what am I actually doing here? That he woke up and he realized that it was all nonsense. He couldn't work in the profession anymore. So I don't know. They're just following the recipe. They're just like a baker in a big commercial kitchen. This is how you make the chocolate cake. This is how you do it. You follow this recipe. Here's the ingredients. And you don't question the head chef. You question the head chef, you're out. Oh, I want to keep my job. Got a family to feed. I believe that what I'm doing is right. I've spent a long time at uni learning this thing. Science is great. Science can't be wrong. I'm just a lowly virologist. Who am I to question my superiors. I'll just follow orders and do what I'm told. No one's going to want to think for themselves, because then you basically put yourself out of a job. And I don't know, like, virologists in high demand in other areas of the workforce. Like, it's a very specific set of skills. Maybe there's no real, there's no, nothing of benefit. I can't think of the word I'm trying to say here. There's no reason for them to go out and start looking or questioning this thing.
Right.
This is the same thing with my profession, Toni. Like, the entire profession of natural medicine is freaking nuts. The entire nutrition profession, of which I was a lecturer of nutritional medicine at a university for 10 years, and naturopathic medicine. Like, the whole industry is in need of a desperate shakeup. But no one in that industry will ever say a word. Because once they start saying things, well, no, you're not welcome here anymore. You're a black sheep. Get out. No one wants you here. This is what happened to me. I essentially had my hand forced basically out of the education system, and I was blacklisted by the profession. Right? So, like, and here I am going, there's all these problems, and people look at me and go, what would you know? You're saying that 1,000 nutritionists and 1,000 naturopaths are all wrong? It's like, yeah, I am. So it's a big problem. It's a big societal issue.
I always intend to be more interested in the one person who goes against everything else, because that is the one with the open mind and looking for the truth. I hope I can get you another question. Lisa is asking, what would be a simple language to explain to those in the same household showing cold-like symptoms that they didn't catch it from each other? Yeah. They eat the same food.
Common environmental exposure.
Yeah, that's it. But I
So
don't
very
think they go
interesting
for it
thing.
anyway.
Here's just a really like simple, practical example that will probably make people go, oh, I see what you mean when you talk about common environmental exposure. Out in the kitchen today, someone was cooking some food and they put a lot of chili in the pot. And we're all out in the kitchen, and the person closest to the pot starts sniffing and sneezing and coughing. And the next person just a little bit further away from the pot, second closest person, same symptoms. Then the next person at the table, and then me on the other side of the room. Oh, something's spreading between us. And we all got the same symptoms. Gee, someone must have spread something around. No, we were all just commonly exposed to an environmental factor, an environmental input. So when people fall sick in a household at the same time, like, houses are pretty toxic places. There's all sorts of stuff off-gassing into the air from toxic building materials. Maybe they just all started inhaling some formaldehyde off-gassing from a piece of drywall at the same time. Or maybe they all ate the same bad food. Or maybe it was all like a local atmospheric event. Maybe the temperature changed. Maybe the humidity changed. There's a million things that could cause that other than a virus, but yet we turn to the virus first as the most logical explanation. Yeah. If people aren't willing to look at alternative explanations, you can't force it upon them. They're only willing to look when they're ready to look. So that's why I do what I do. I just put the information out there, and when the people are ready to hear it, they will.
I have one question that was a discussion I had probably a few years ago about that no one, it was even before I heard about from you in your book about nobody has ever seen a virus. And I got the answer back that she had seen a virus using an electron microscope. And you wrote about that in your book too, under what even is a virus.
Yeah, I'm not saying that people aren't seeing.
Yeah, does it mean it can be seen?
I'm not saying people aren't seeing particles.
Okay.
So people can see particles under an electron microscope, but you have to demonstrate that that particle is the thing that you're saying it is.
Got it.
So is that particle a virus? How do you know it's the virus? Have you isolated that particle, just had the particle by itself, and then exposed it to a healthy human being and shown that it causes disease? Have you done that? To my knowledge and understanding, no one has ever done that. Even like the virology textbooks and the papers published in this field say that they cannot isolate a virus that way. They cannot separate a virus from all these other particles in a sample because they're all very similar in size and shape, and they're not sure how to separate the virus out. They don't have the technology to do it. So they admit that, which means then you can't just have the virus by itself, which would be an independent variable, which is a necessity. It is a necessity to have an independent variable to conduct a scientific experiment. So if you don't have an independent variable, you can't conduct a scientific experiment, and then you can't prove or demonstrate cause and effect. So like that's a major problem. What is the particle that they're looking at? How have you demonstrated that it is the thing that you say it is? And if someone has done that, I would love to see the paper. I'd love to sit down and read it. And if it does explain and it shows the experiment that they claim, proves what they claim, then I'll basically recant everything I've said. But we've been looking for a really long time. There's a group of us who have been looking. No one can find it. I searched the literature high and low for 5 years, could not find this paper. Dozens of other scientists and doctors have also been looking. We cannot find that paper. Maybe it exists. But if it exists, then let this be a lesson to the world and the scientific community that let's have these papers much more readily accessible to medical and health professionals so that we don't make mistakes like this in the future. I don't think that paper exists. That's why we can't find it. But some people claim that it's out there. So simply show us. Like these experiments should be readily available. You should be able to go to phone up any health department and go, give me the paper that shows the proof of virus existence. Show me the paper that proves that that sick people make healthy people sick. Like these experiments do not exist. There's over 200 experiments in my book where they tried to do that. Like demonstrating contagion should be a really simple thing. You get a bunch of sick people, a bunch of healthy people, you put them in a room together and you see what happens. Simple, very easy experiment. Now, many people aren't aware that that's been done. It's been done over and over and over and over again, and not once have they ever demonstrated this phenomena called contagion. Not once. That's a massive problem for something that we basically have our lives ruled by. And we did have our lives ruled by this idea for 4 years, that things like sick people can infect healthy people just with fleeting contact. Like you walk past someone in the street, I cough on them and they get sick. They did this over and over and over and over and over again. They could never make the healthy people sick. So it would suggest that that is not the way that it happens. And even in these papers, the authors of the papers say, we don't think this is how colds and flus are transmitted. We think there's something else going on here. This deserves further attention. This is like back in the 1910s and 20s and 30s and 40s, and no one ever listened. Because once you do listen to that and you go, okay, this is happening via some other mechanism, that's the end of contagion. It's over. So that veil is then lifted and you start going, right, well, what really is happening? And once you work out that, hey, maybe it's all the poisons in our environment, well, people aren't going to be happy about that and they're going to want things to change. They're going to demand more of the construction industry. We don't want you building our homes out of toxic building material. They're going to demand more out of the automotive industry. We don't want you making our cars out of petrochemicals, and we don't want you using fuel like oil and burning it to fuel the car because it's polluting our air and it's making us sick. It affects the agricultural industry. We don't want you spraying poison in our food anymore. We don't want you using artificial synthetic fertilizers. It affects the clothing industry. We don't want any more synthetic fibers. It impacts every single industry because every industry uses petrochemicals to produce the goods and services that they offer. So if the people really clued onto this, these industries could not adapt quick enough. And basically what you would see is an absolute collapse of Western society as you know it. And it just so happens that around the same time that germ theory was incepted was around the same time that plastic and pesticides were invented. Now, is that just like a coincidence? Or was it like, oh shit, there's going to be some fallout from us spraying poison on food and making plastic and doing all these things? This war against nature, there's going to be a bit of fallout. People are going to start getting sick. How do we get them to buy this? How do we get them to accept this? Oh, let's tell them it's a microscopic thing. It's an invisible particle in the air. It's nature. It's Mother Nature doing the problem. It's not us. It's not anything that we're doing. It's a great idea. So if we were ever to question this and it was to ever come out, it's over for society. Like we can't pivot fast enough. So, I mean, is it any wonder why there's so much resistance around this? I mean, it's like, I don't think people truly comprehend the totality of the situation. But I mean, I think by having these conversations, what we can do is change slowly over time and adapt so that the fallout's not so bad. Because we're starting to see people interested in like organic and permaculture farming and using natural building materials and sort of building homes and things the way we used to do things. And like people interested getting back into Mother Nature and growing their own food and wearing natural clothing materials and having less of a footprint on the earth. They're interested in doing these things. So if we try and rip the scab off tomorrow, that's going to be a really painful process. There's going to be a lot of fallout, a lot of damage from that. But if we do this smart and just slowly, little bit by little bit, we just drip feed some information and a few people start to change their minds and go, oh, maybe we should do things this way. The transition across to a world that is not so heavily dependent on these things making us sick is a much nicer transition. It's a lot less taxing. It's a lot less fallout. It's better for everybody. So I know people want to see this sort of system fall overnight, but I don't think it's the best way forward. I think the way we're seeing it now, slowly unraveling and changing, where it's like a nice gradual course correction. That's a beautiful thing.
We are doing it, Daniel, and you are a big part of it. So thank you. We are almost at, 1 hour and 20 minutes. And Robert Stagnito says Daniel is brilliant. So you are.
Thank you.
We all find you brilliant, and we love to have you here again because you pointed out a few things that are important for people to learn about and to dig in further. So again, and I keep saying it, buy that book and you catch a cold. If you wonder what to say, like what was it, Jane or Lisa asked, what do I tell people? Have that book on your coffee table in the house. People are always curious. They will want to know. They will start reading in it. And it may be baby steps, but we are doing it. We are seeing a change. We are seeing people not wanting to run to doctors because something is going on, but take more responsibility about how their life is. And you touched on that too. I mean, it is not easy for people to take responsibility for what they are doing. It's much easier to blame it on something outside ourselves so that we cannot do anything about it and just keep going on with our life. And in the meantime, we get sicker and what the heck happened to us? So, and yeah, wouldn't we all want that magic pill that makes us instantly healthier, like the so-called med beds everyone is talking about? I'm not even a fan of it, and I could use it, but I'm not a fan of it. I want people to start taking responsibility. Look at how their life is, what they can change for the better. And this is what we're doing on a daily basis. We keep teaching people. And I must say, my consultation business is getting busier. And people do want to learn. They don't want to follow what they have been told or how they have been brainwashed because they see now it's not working. So we keep doing what we're doing. Katie and Sara, maybe you had some questions for Daniel?
Katie, if you want to go first, please do.
I was having a hard time finding my unmute button, and hopefully you guys can hear me better. I have the computer like in my face.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here. It was very enlightening, and yeah, people are changing, and they're starting to recognize, something's not right here. It doesn't make sense. And I think what you brought to the table is just beautiful. And like Toni said, it would be nice to have you on here again because there are things that you brought up that we could talk about a little bit more. So thank you so much and appreciate all the work that you've done and enjoy you writing this book in such a time that we needed it. So thank you.
I agree with Katie and what the gentleman also said too. I do think you're brilliant, and thank you so much for having the courage to stand up and write this book and do the research that was well needed for all of us. And although there may not be a big following right now of everything that we all do, but like you said, when people are ready for it, they will come and they will find it when it is time. And we're just laying the groundwork for all the future generations that are going to come and be able to look back at these books and take that knowledge and spread it even further and wider than we ever could. But I'd love to have you back on the show as well too. I definitely have some other questions about stuff being transmitted through radio waves and frequencies and things like that. I know we've touched on during one of the last podcasts with you, but I also find that very interesting as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for
Sarah.
being.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks for being here, Daniel. I'll have when you come back on, hopefully you do. I'll have more questions because I'm not really familiar with this. But when we're seeing doctors give up their licenses and their legal ability to give out medications, drugs, actually, then we know there's a major shift coming because even the doctors are waking up. There are many that are still asleep and many that are profiting a lot. But the real key thing to me is like don't know if you know who Bruce Lipton is, but he discovered epigenetics, that we are above the gene. Well, your information is just as important as his, and it was not accepted by the matter of fact, he kind of got kicked out of the whole system But now people are starting to understand it, and it's becoming mainstream, and yours is going to do the same thing because it's so powerful that it's hard for people to maybe get the entire concept of what you're saying. But our brains control everything. We're just a thread in the electromagnetic fields, and so I'm really excited to be here and listen to this firsthand, and I will be studying more about this. I'll get your book and really dig into that, because I believe that everything you're saying is right on the money. It's just that the mainstream hasn't caught up with it yet, but they're going to, because we'll be spreading the word.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Gary.
Gary. And you're right. There are a lot of doctors waking up now, and big channels on YouTube, like people with millions of followers who are doctors are like, I'm getting out. I'm done. They can't do it anymore. And just to sort of cap off on that final point you said there, Gary, this is the way that the world used to understand health. This is the way 150 years ago that the medical system worked. It was with like this naturopathic, sanitarian approach to healthcare. This was the norm. It's just that we got disconnected from it. So nothing that I'm saying here is new. We knew this from 1,000, 2,000, however many years of accumulating knowledge through trial and error. And it came to a pinnacle in about 1880. We were at the height of our understanding of health and wellness. And then we got disconnected from it. So all that's happening now is that we're reconnecting. It's just, it's old world knowledge. It makes sense because it's the truth. And it's just going to take some time for people to adjust and reconnect. So we absolutely are at the sort of precipice of this. And I think it's a really wonderful time to be alive, to witness the rekindling of that ancient wisdom.
Thank you, Daniel. I want to point out that Daniel's website is listed in the description. He also has a very active Telegram channel, and you will find that when you type in Humanley. Do you pronounce it as Humanley?
Humanly, yeah,
Humanly.
humanly.
Okay, it's Humanley. And you will find a lot of great information and other interviews that he does with people, and they are very interesting too. So I've been listening to that. And on his website, you can have there's a lot of free information. You can also have a paid subscription and even get more about all his very interesting research and conclusions. So thank you so much for being here. We look forward to the next time, and we'll figure out when that will be. So thank you so much. And thanks everyone for being here, for listening to us. And I would say till the next time. Love
Thank
you
you.
all.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
See you. Thank you so much.